Hello, and just thought I'd do a video. Apologies for the irregular upload. I haven't uploaded in quite a while. I just thought I'd cover a topic that may interest a lot of collectors who focus on the Vietnam conflict, and also again reenactors and even living historians, again who are looking to essentially improve their kit and, in other words, add things that a lot of people forget and a lot of you know people who are new to the hobby may not even realize. And one of the things and main things that a lot of people forget, especially those who are new to the hobby, is things such as pocket fillers or pocket items, as are commonly known. So what I've done is I've laid my US third pattern jungle fatigues out, as you can see. I'll talk about that briefly in a second. I've just laid on top of the pocket, each pocket, essentially what would go in each pocket. Again, this is just a broad um, generalization, you could say. These are just the most common items you would see from period photographs and would make sense for the soldier to carry. I'll go in depth when I talk about each one. So we'll start again with the uniform. As you see, it's the third pattern jungle fatigue, developed obviously from the previous second and first pattern jungle fatigues. Um, the main difference between the first, second, and third, the third, as you can see here, it does not have any epaulets. As you can see, it has no epaulets here. The buttons along the front are obviously covered, um, and the pockets, that you can't see them in a minute, they also have covered buttons, and also the side waist adjustment tabs and buttons are also were removed on the design, um, for a few reasons. One of them being that, obviously, as you can imagine, going through jungle foliage, you could easily be caught on, plants and so forth, and it could easily rip the buttons out or damage the uniform or the pocket or so forth. And it's just not really practical. It's not ideal. Again, removing them features from the previous first and second pattern, mainly the first pattern, would mean that it could, again, it's a more practical tunic, um, and also means that it also actually helps reduce costs, as obviously removing certain things obviously reduces costs. As you can imagine, removing even just small items from uniform when it's mass produced obviously saves in the long run. But I'll just quickly talk about the insignia. So as you can see here, it's got the rifle qualification badge, as you can see here, sewn on. Again, this is, as you can notice, it's all subdued. Obviously, it's important, other than the unit identification, which we'll talk about in a second. So you have the rifle qualification um, award, essentially, that's sewn on the uniform. Earlier versions were in a white and blue on green. Obviously, this is just black and green, as all the subdue would be. Underneath it, we have a tailor, locally made in country US Army name tape. Um, and interestingly, there's no ranks worn on the upper sleeves. As you can see, they're allocated now to subdued pins, as you see pinned on the collar. They're far easier, far better, really, because um, from reading from, again, stories and documentation, when they obviously troops in Vietnam, their uniforms were just, because of extreme use, as you can imagine, daily use and extreme use in the field and the environment, they would just essentially just fall to, eventually be worn out. For especially the trousers in particular, were known for blowing out in the crotch area, which is not ideal. So obviously, when they would resupply troops in the jungle, they would often obviously include new sets of uniform, and having things like pins, rank pins, as you can see on the collar tabs, is a lot easier than obviously sewing on uniform, sewing insignia on, obviously. So it's far quicker. Again, mentioning that obviously not all troops would have their insignia sewn on. There's many pictures of troops without any real insignia, maybe one or two. You may see none, maybe just with the unit identification badge insignia on the sleeve. Some, again, there's many pictures of troops without any because again, it's just the rotation of uniform cycling through essentially. Um, but again, moving on. So lastly, the last piece of insignia, it would have a name tape. I haven't got a name tape yet. I would like to get one. Um, my surname, but haven't quite found one yet. So the problem is a lot of the reproduction ones, some of them you can find them again. I think there's a bloke on Facebook who does a decent reproduction, but a lot of the places that do reproductions, they don't do it correctly, or they're just not quite the right. The tape that the material they're sewn onto, as in the text they're actually sewn onto, is not necessarily correct, or the font, the style of text is not quite right. Um, Obviously, you can do it yourself. I'm not quite that good at sewing. You can do basic sewing, but I'm not quite that good at that. But I will at some point include it. Again, you do see examples with troops, again, like I just mentioned, without insignia on at all for reasons just noted. Again, quickly, as you can see, it's we have the First Infantry Division. You can see here, famously known as the Big Red One for obvious reasons. Um, as I said, going back to the reason for insignia being subdued, as you can imagine, when you've got brightly coloured insignia, it does stand out, especially in the field when you're trying to camouflage and you're all green, and then you've got coloured insignia, especially with a white, because the previous name tapes were white, and the US Army used to be obviously a gold text on a black background. So again, and even with coloured insignia, which again was coloured, so it would obviously stick out. So subdue is a better form of camouflaging it. It's less likely to be seen. And unit identification patches insignia were also introduced. However, many units, and including the First ID, and there's many other units, again, photos prove this, where they simply either ignored it or just weren't issued or just weren't interested. So they would keep their coloured unit identification for, like I said, one of the reasons being to stand out, to make themselves look, as a professional soldier, so to speak, to stand out from others. And I guess sort of a morale thing within the unit itself. But again, we'll talk more in depth about the development of the jungle fatigues in a later video. I just thought I'd briefly talk about it. So going on to the actual main feature and the main point of this video, which is the pocket content. So starting from the top, this looking at the top right, or as you're looking for at the top left, as you're seeing it. So we have in the two bags, you see the Chu Ho, I believe that's how you pronounce it. They're essentially bags. Now the bags themselves look like this, if you can see, and they were essentially issued primarily to troops to have ammunition, mainly in obviously inside the bags, and they would be sealed up with a metal piece strip here that would be folded over itself, creates a waterproof bag, and again was primarily mainly issued and designed to carry ammunition, whether it be in bandoliers or loosely, and then later you see troops also using them for just putting the magazines with ammunition in as well. However, as you can see, and as I've done, as again you can also sometimes see, obviously troops would use these to keep things waterproof, essentially, which is a really useful thing to have. So it's very useful for the troops to keep things waterproof, which they don't want to get wet, obviously, which is important when you're crossing streams and rivers and so forth, which can be above your chest, it can be quite high. So again, it's quite important to keep things dry, such as in this, as you can see on the which I'm pointing to, the bag itself contains toilet paper, mints, sachets from the MCI Meal Combat Individual, which was a ration issued out to soldiers during the conflict in Vietnam throughout the war. Was the most commonly was the MCI ration, which again I've covered previously on this channel. And in the accessory pack, which is these brown packets, they're sealed. We'll get onto that in a second. They would contain things like sugar, salt, coffee, again toilet paper, mints, chewing gum, I should say, and that sort of thing. And also they would obviously have cigarettes, during the Vietnam War. I believe it was post 1972, 73, I believe it was, they stopped including cigarettes in the accessory packs. But as I was saying, so inside you have just simply mints. You see the yellow packet is mints. You've got toilet paper, two sets of toilet paper, and then the larger sachet is simply sachets of coffee, salt, and sugar. Salt is very important in the jungle. If you're in the jungle environment, if you can imagine, when you sweat, you're sweating away um, obviously electrolytes, which are important. So salt's a good alternative for that, and it's important. And again, listening to troops interviews, they would regularly be told to, when they could, ingest salt because they would sweat out so much. As you can imagine, obviously Vietnam being quite a hot and tropical, humid environment, obviously you'd be continuously sweating, not just wearing clothes, but obviously, carrying their equipment, which we consider to be heavy, as you can imagine. So it's very important that they continuously have regular intake of water, and most importantly, electrolytes, sodium, salt, obviously. Next to that, below again, we have the same, another packet, again, exactly the same, additional salt, coffee, toilet paper in this Chiho bag. Again, exactly the same. So two sets that are essentially identical, minus the mint, you can see. On top, we just have some matches. Next to that, the gold Zippo lighter. It's just a generic lighter. You also see, you have to be careful because if you're interested in collecting Zippo lighters, you've probably seen there's a lot of Vietnam, quote unquote, Vietnam Zippos. Now, some of them are original that were procured or used during the conflict by troops, and they may have had engraving. Obviously, some of them have been faked, as many things, military and other things, as you're probably aware, have been faked. So, if you're wanted to procure one, you need to look out for things and so forth. But this is just a simple generic brass Zippo lighter. Again, fairly common to see Zippo lighters. Next to it, of course, like I said, you've got matches. Again, I forgot to mention the matches were obviously also included in the MCI ration. Again, very important, not just for heating rations, but obviously people that smoke. So what I've done is I've included a reproduction packet of some Marlboro cigarettes. Obviously, you'll know what cigarettes are. To the right, you've got a spoon. This is the MCI ration, again, part of the MCI meal combat individual ration. You've got the spoon, which was separate, obviously important for eating your meals. I've left it in the bag. You see troops that don't have spoons sealed. Some of them are, again, unsealed and they're stored in either the helmet band or in a pocket just behind in the pen pocket, essentially behind the top left or the right, as you're looking at it, the top right pocket, which is designed to hold a pen or pencil, predominantly a pen. You do see troops with spoons with the spoons in the pocket. What I'm saying. Next to it, again, you see this is an actual MCI ration cigarette. This is again reproduction Pall Mall. Again, this is the side that would only have, I believe, 5 or so cigarettes inside. Again, not as much as, say, the 20 pack, as you can see there. So you can see it only has a certain amount of cigarettes. Beneath it, again, to the right of that, we obviously have the accessory pack. We'll look at that again in detail in another video. But you do, obviously, troops would carry extra sets because, again, as I've mentioned, inside of the MCI, the accessory packs, MCI ration packs, accessory packs, the brown packages, you can see. What's important, as I mentioned, they've got things like salt, toilet paper. It's obviously important in the field. You want to have as much as you can, really. You don't want to be caught short, so to speak, obvious reasons. So you've got, again, inside would be additional toilet paper, matches, again, salt, sachets, which is important, coffee, and that sort of thing. And again, including things as well as extra matches and cigarettes. So again, it's quite important for the soldier to essentially carry as much as you can. And things like this would be quite important to the soldiers, you can imagine. Underneath that, you have a hot weather anti-chap stick. So it's just a chapstick issued. They would also be issued things such as sun cream. Obviously, you can imagine, again, in hot environments, when you're not in the jungle, because when you're in a lot of the thicker areas of the jungle in Vietnam, it is double or triple canopy, meaning there's three layers essentially of trees overhanging, so it can actually be quite dark. But obviously, when you're out, maybe in a paddy field or along, a field and so forth, when you're cutting across or whatever, when you're out of the when you're out of the jungle, so to speak, obviously you're still exposed to the sun. Again, obviously a hot climate, so sunburn would be a concern. So they would be issued sun cream in a small cylindrical pot for obvious reasons. Again, even when in R&R and so forth. Below that, we also have again below it some camo cream. You see there in the tube. One has green, the other one has loom, which is brown. And again, obvious reasons, it's the camouflage to conceal. You don't, interestingly, you don't see as many regular troops with face paint camo paint on. You see more reconnaissance troops, um, MACV SOG, I guess, and other like US Navy SEALs, Berets, and so forth. They're the ones that you see in photographs popularly, um, that do use and obviously wear camo cream to conceal and help, camouflage themselves. You don't really see it too much. I've just included it. Again, it's potential. Again, some units did, but it's just you see from many pictures, not as many troops in terms of infantry troops would always do that. Um, Below it, we have one of the C ration tins. It's the B2 unit, I believe. So it would contain either ham or whatever, obviously depending on the menu of which was given, with the ration itself. So again, you do see troops. You can see in pictures, it's obvious that they're carrying extra rations themselves because they're not going to carry the box. They may carry a couple of boxes, but they usually carry things such as C ration socks, which are things like the smaller and the larger containers of the MCI ration. All together essentially in a long sock, usually carried on the lightweight or tropical rucksacks again. And you do see them carried in things like pockets, both the lower tunic, jacket, I should say, and the trousers. So again, they do fit in. The pockets are quite large, considering what they can take is, pretty useful in that regard. So of course you've got the rations. Below it, we've just got a simple US pocket knife. Again, obviously useful tool to have for obvious reasons. You all know what a pocket knife is: tin opener, small blade, things for fishing line, small saw, that sort of thing. Obvious, and bottle opener, that sort of thing. So again, obviously useful to have. Next to it, just an additional sealed accessory ration pack. Again, is if the troops are able, if the soldiers are able to carry extra, they will do. Especially again, it contains useful things I've previously mentioned. And then lastly, to the left, we have again another smaller unit, the B2, which would largely contain things. This would contain things such as crackers, biscuits, depending on how you want your term. Essentially, biscuits, and then occasionally at the bottom they would have like a small chocolate, sort of a fudge. Kind of like a biscuit, essentially cylindrical at the bottom, but some of them would just contain crackers, biscuits, depending now however you want to define them by term. Above that, you just have a very even smaller tin, and this again, depending on the menu. Again, this is the rations depending on the box of what menu you be issued from the MCI ration. Above it, you've got a small tin of peanut butter. Again, you'd also have things such as jam, processed cheese, so forth. This is just a small tin of peanut butter. Again, nothing else to say, obvious reasons. Obviously, you can have it with crackers. So again, it's additional food. Next to that, you have an important thing, which is the insect repellent, or bug juice, as troops would nickname it, bug juice for obvious reasons. This is just in a bottle. Again, it's a clear, slightly see-through plastic bottle with a label on with the instructions. Again, they're famously, you can see them worn in helmet bands. A common mistake with a lot of new reenactors is that they have the desire to essentially fill the helmet band, the band that obviously encircles the top of the helmet. They have a tendency, a lot of new beginners who may not know, they have the tendency to unfortunately include far too much stuff to, as a term, things like playing cards or loads of ammunition or anything really that they can fit in there, which is not entirely accurate. If you're portraying a certain soldier and the soldier you're portraying has that, that's fine. That's an interpretation, which is again, it's for interpretation piece. That's absolutely fine. However, if you're basing this off an average soldier, I would urge those to essentially have very little to none. If you want to put something in the helmet band, maybe the most common is jungle bug insect repellent and bug juice. You see that famously worn. It's obvious by pictures. There's quite a lot of pictures, obviously, showing the insect repellent worn at the side of the helmet band. Another thing commonly worn is things like an oil bottle, obviously for your rifle, and sometimes like a magazine feed. Again, they're just a couple of the things. Again, there's many pictures showing a lot of soldiers without anything in the helmet bands at all, essentially without anything. Um, and if you are new to this hobby and you're focusing on interest on Vietnam, I actually suggest you don't put anything in it. Again, because to be honest, there's a lot more pictures of them with less stuff, equipment stuffed into them. And again, it's that saying as well, less is more to a degree. But again, for accuracy, you don't really want to put much. If you really want to put anything, again, the most common from photographs is things such as bug juice or an oil bottle. Maybe put one or the other. Again, don't go crazy and put everything in them, because that's unfortunately the glamorization of Hollywood and films, which aren't entirely accurate, obviously. They're just entertainment pieces at the end of the day. They may be portraying a story, which is true in some of them, but unfortunately, a lot of them, such as Full Metal Jacket, the film itself is okay as a film, but accuracy, it's not very accurate. For example, they're obviously Marines, and yet they're wearing a three-quarter vest armor, which they shouldn't. They should be wearing M55 vests. So again, I won't get into that, but point is, if you're interested in starting the hobby, if you're wanting to know what to put in the helmet, I would actually say either nothing or maybe something like bug juice. And the reason why I've just laid it down here is just because to show it again. Guys would carry maybe an extra bottle, or if they didn't have it on the helmet, they would have it, obviously, as I say, in the pocket. Um, Again, this is just a generalization of things they would obviously carry in their pockets. Um, it's all period items, so, and some are obviously mostly original. They're all original items, except for the reproduction cigarettes. Um, so, and as I say, you know, when you're doing things such as pocket fillers, it's best to get things. If you're starting out, obviously you can fill them with something that you're not going to obviously get out. So you can fill them with additional socks. Again, that's something I was going to bring up with the trousers. You would see things like additional rations, smaller tins, extra socks, obviously in the uh, Chiho bags, obviously to keep them dry, obviously, but they would usually be carried in their pack. But again, um, as I say, if you're really wanting to improve your kit, I would suggest looking at having things, pocket items such as this. Even something like this would be perfectly fine, because at the end of the day, they won't be visible. However, for extra detail, again, this is more for extra detail to improve. You want to have period items, again, items that they would have carried. And again, as I mentioned, there's many pictures you can see there, the outline of additional ration tins being carried, bug juice, obviously things such as cigarette lighters, obviously would be, obvious, especially those that were smoked, that sort of thing. Again, there's, like, as I've mentioned, there's pictures of the MCR ration either stuck in the pen pocket, which sits just behind the actual pocket on the uniform, designed for a pen, or again elsewhere. But that's essentially it for this video. Didn't really want to ramble on, unfortunately I have, but like I said, the main topic of this was to simply look at essentially all the items that would have been carried during the Vietnam War. Again, this is just of a troop, obviously third pattern, so it would be sort of mid to late war, so around 67 onwards sort of thing. This is sort of the era that I focused this on, 67, 68 onward. Um, so during, say, the Tet Offensive, for example. But again, these sort of items, again, you can find them. But as I say, I'll just quickly, what I'll do now is I'll quickly show you just a close-up of the items. Obviously, I talked about. So as you can see here, as I mentioned, we've got the matches on the top left, the green packet. We have, of course, the standard, just the generic Zippo lighter, the Marlboro cigarettes, obviously, the toilet paper. Of course, the yellow packet is the mints. Got some more matches in there. Again, sachets. Next to it, we've got more sachets of, again, coffee, salt, toilet paper as well, additional toilet paper. The spoon, I'll show you in a second what I was on about with the pocket. MCI ration, cigarettes, C-rams, that would come in the packet. Packet themselves, this is sealed. The anti-chapstick, chapstick essentially, as you can see. The camouflage cream, again, not always worn, not often worn by regular troops, but it's just something to add. Again, B3 unit, as you can see here. The US pocket knife. Another sealed packet. The insect repellent, the bug juice as his nickname, a B2 unit. Obviously, it would have things like crackers, peanut butter, and so forth. I'll just quickly show you. So again, as I was saying, behind, as you can see here, it can simply slot in like so. And you do see troops, usually without the packet. I've just left the packaging on, but usually see troops without the spoon, without the packaging, just slotted down there because it's easy to get to. Again, it's intended to be used with a pen, but again, as I say, this picture's showing otherwise. Another thing to note would be good is things like a notepad, a pencil, or a pen. However, I don't have this in the uniform because a lot of troops, again, obviously, especially later, if you're doing an urban environment, you would have things like a notepad and pen usually placed in the body armor. Again, there's pictures to prove it. They would have, like, again, notepad and pen, pencil in the body armor, because if you imagine, the body armor obviously sits over your uniform, so it's simply easier to get to, and that's the reason for it. A lot of these items, again, troops didn't always wear body armor, especially, again, the army. The Marines were, as part of their SOP, they kind of had to, especially in urban environments, you see them wearing them, body armors. But again, that's a whole other video. So that's essentially it for this video. Hopefully it was of an interest. So apologies for the ramble, but hopefully that was somewhat interesting and useful to anyone trying to improve or get pocket items. So yeah, cheers for watching.